Welcome to Conversations Through Alzheimer's. I'm Amber Marty.
And I'm Felicia Wood. We're sisters and daughters of Rosemary Marty, diagnosed with Alzheimer's in June of 2025.
We're documenting her journey as it happens, and we're sharing every resource we find along the way.
This is her story.
And ours.
Thank you so much for joining us today for another episode of Conversations Through Alzheimer's. First, we would just want to start by saying thank you so much for all of the support. We've started to receive fan mail and different kind of comments on our TikTok, just thanking us for sharing our journey. And honestly, it's nice to receive that, but mostly just because as we've sat here for so many hours to kind of record this and try to piece it together and wonder what would be helpful and what is sharing too much and where have we gotten it wrong. It's really nice just to feel like these conversations do mean something. We hoped that they would, and we think that they do. So thanks for joining us again. This week, we're going to be talking about, we've spent a lot of time talking about what we did as a family once we got my mom's diagnosis, kind of centered around her care, her medications, what we were going to do with her care team, what kind of strategies were we going to do to help support her. But we haven't really talked about what went through our brains when it came to what if we get Alzheimer's, right? There's a really big real moment that happens with that. And so that's what we're going to be discussing today. But first, we do want to just have this little check-in. So I'll just share that over in real time, it's about mid-July when we're recording this. And our mom just spent the last couple weeks here. She'd flown out at the end of June to Plattsburgh, where I live, to spend Oliver's birthday with him and with me, and we got to spend a lot of time as a family, and then we road tripped over to Buffalo, and honestly it was great to spend time with her, but it was definitely very humbling and very awakening just to see where is she at in real time. I feel like she's doing really great. She's got a ton of energy, and there were a lot of things that we really love to see just in terms of how consistent she was in a lot of ways. But there were other symptoms that showed that, that we have been trying to process in real time. And I would say that's kind of the biggest thing that I think Amber, you and I have been doing, is just trying to process what we kind of just learned and where we go from here. And I know you're heading out to see her again the rest of this month. So I know that's probably on your mind. Is that kind of where you're at right now? What's going on in your life with caregiving right now?
Yeah. She only left a few days ago. So the majority of what I've been dealing with her is just, making sure she has all her cords unpacked and everything is, set up. She, got back and immediately did her laundry, and it's the travel didn't affect her at all. She was totally fine. I don't think we've talked about this on the podcast before, so I'll mention it. We had our dad get a gate pass for this trip, and this was the first time that we did that. What that means is you can go up to, in this case, it was United, go up to the United gate when you get to the airport and say, my spouse, my brother, sister, whoever you're with, my companion has a disability. You don't even have to say what it is. Has a disability, and I need to get a gate pass to walk them to the gate. And basically the gate agent will issue you a boarding pass that lets you go through security and lets you walk them to the gate. And then I did that with my mom in Buffalo, and she was heading back to Denver as well. And it was a super easy, super simple process. I will say, for anyone wondering, my mom and I both have TSA PreCheck, and you cannot do TSA PreCheck with it. They have no way to stamp it on there. So just an FYI to anyone who has TSA PreCheck, you won't be able to use that. You'll have to go through the standard lines, but it was fine. But yeah, the other thing I wanted to mention with that is the Sunflower program. A lot of airports are starting to do this, and airlines. At Denver International specifically, they have little booths all around the airport that have the Sunflower logo. You can just go up and say, I have a disability, I would like a lanyard, and it's basically a lanyard that has a bunch of sunflowers on it that is supposed to be a way to show other people in the airport or on the airline that you have a hidden disability. So people with autism can use it, people with dementia can use it, something you'd never know that somebody has a disability that by just looking at them. And it was really helpful for my mom because, if she needed help opening the door to the bathroom on the airplane, for example, because those are tricky, the flight attendants will be able to see that lanyard and see oh, she probably needs a little bit of help. I'm going to go over and help her without having to call attention to it. So just know that's another thing that I just learned about a few weeks before she traveled and wanted to share that information along to her.
I appreciate you sharing that, because we'll have a whole separate episode around a live update from this last trip. I think it will be good for us to just kind of go in and in some ways, I think I wish we were ready to have it right now, but I think we need probably a little bit more time to even kind of gather our own thoughts, just so we are able to put it together in a coherent way for all of you. But yeah, it did make us, one of the things we've been starting to talk about when her next trip will be and what that looks like. And I know that we are planning to do the Walk to End Alzheimer's in Buffalo at the end of September. So we're really hoping that she can come out and be a part of that as well. And so we're just kind of closely monitoring how she's doing between now and then before we make that final decision.
Yeah, I know we've mentioned that in previous episodes, but we're getting closer. So just wanted to put it out there again. We have a team for the Buffalo, or the Western New York chapter, called Conversations Through Alzheimer's. And me and Felicia will be there, hopefully my mom, and I have some friends joining us. Like it's going to be a great time. I've heard tons of great things and how fun it is. And we learned recently there's a 1 mile walk and a 3 mile walk. So if you're like, oh, I don't want to do a whole 5K, like they definitely have shorter walks if anyone wants to join our team and come walk with us. We're also going to put in the show notes the link to donate. 100% of the donations go to the Alzheimer's Association. And it's just been such a incredible association for our family. And, I've shared in the past, like I'm able to call them and say, like, I need, elder law attorney, and they'll email you a list. They'll help you find anything you need for free. And so like I really want to make sure that I'm giving back to this organization in any way I can. And hopefully if any of you want to donate, it'll be in the show notes.
Yeah, exactly. We would love to see you come out and help support the Walk to End Alzheimer's in any way. And of course, if you're listening to this in the future, past September of 2026, I bet chances are pretty good that we're going to be continuing to participate in this event, or there's other events all around. So please look and research the Walk to End Alzheimer's wherever you are. And of course, we have more information in the show notes. But getting back to the theme for today, I wanted to, like I said, just take us back into, I'd almost like my feeling is almost saying like the more selfish part of like Amber and I looking at ourselves and saying like, are we going to get Alzheimer's? Like that when we first got Mom's diagnosis, I mean, obviously we were very worried about her. I think you've heard many episodes of all of that, where that attention went, but there's a very scary moment that happens for each of us as individuals when we think, is this something that can happen to me? So Amber, do you want to kind of go back and what do you remember from those kind of conversations early on? Like what was one of the first things that you did or thought about?
Yeah, well, I've heard even before Mom got diagnosed, like they started to have the option to test like the APOE gene on like 23andMe and things like that when you do like genetic testing. But I know that there's a lot of caveats with that. Like they always have a whole disclaimer that says like, this does not indicate you will get Alzheimer's. You have to understand that before you test for it. Just because you have a APOE4 gene, like it just means you are more predisposed to get it, but it does not mean you will. And I think it kind of segues perfectly into, when we first heard like my mom has Alzheimer's, I think we went to AI and said like, can you help us understand like how people get Alzheimer's? Because like we really wanted to understand, like explain to me like a 5-year-old, I think we said, how do you get Alzheimer's? How do you prevent it? And Felicia, do you remember the exact analogy? Like I'm gonna butcher it if I try.
Yeah, no. So this is actually really funny because like we said lots of times, Amber and I call each other up and sometimes we're like, okay, type into ChatGPT, like how do you, this, we go back and forth. And I remember this very specifically, we were talking with each other, trying to use AI to help us understand this. And essentially it kind of said like, you have to think of it like a garden. There are some gardens just for whatever reason, like where they grow, the kind of soil, whatever, like they're just not going to get weeds. Flowers are going to grow there great. And like in this analogy, like the weeds are the Alzheimer's disease, right? So like the garden is the brain. So like you might grow flowers and things go great and there's just not a lot of weeds there. And then on the other hand, there's like a very specific kind of garden that this would be like, there's a very small number of cases that are autosomal dominant familial. where the families carry a very specific kind of mutation. These are rare. There's like something like 5 per 100,000 cases, but it is very dominant. So if a parent carries it, there's a chance that each child they have has a 50-50 shot at getting Alzheimer's, regardless of the lifestyle. Like you could do everything to, in this analogy, like till your garden and watch for the weeds, but like you still may get it. And so we're very scared that could be what we were dealing with. We weren't really sure. But the majority is something in the middle, right? So it's like everyone has some seeds in the soil. There's many different kind of contributing factors, and it's not necessarily deterministic that you are going to get a certain kind of outcome. And it kind of changes like how much you're weeding, things like that. So I don't know, maybe I just butchered that explanation, but that kind of helped us to start to understand, at least navigate in the beginning, because when we first got her diagnosis, we had no genetic information. We hadn't done any genetic testing. And now it's just over a year later, we've got a lot more genetic information regarding mom. She's had a lot of genetic testing done specifically to prepare for her candidate C for the injection therapies, and we've learned a lot more about it. And I don't know, do you want to kind of explain more of that?
Yeah, so I'm going to kind of tie in what I was talking about before into the garden analogy. So I've kind of gone through this in the previous episodes. So there's APOE2 is basically the garden that's going to have less weeds. Doesn't mean you can't get weeds, but you're probably going to have less just based on the soil that's there, maybe your environment you're in, and you don't have to like go out and buy a weed killer or anything like that. Then there's APOA3, which is what we learned my mom has, which is neutral. It does not mean you're going to have less weeds. It doesn't mean you're going to have more weeds. But with that, like you should probably buy some weed killer, actively get out there and pull the weeds so they don't go haywire, but it's a neutral garden. And then APOE4 means that you're probably going to have more weeds in your garden and you need to be more careful of that. Doesn't mean it's going to go crazy and you're going to have a million weeds, but you're going to need to be more proactive than the people with the other gardens to make sure you're keeping up on those weeds. And yeah. I kind of think of those weeds as the brain pillars, which we'll kind of go into, but very briefly, getting a lot of sleep, making sure maybe you're eating like a anti-inflammatory diet, you're exercising, all those types of things. And every time, like I'm thinking about this analogy and I go to do one of those things, like I'm going to the gym, I'm like, oh, I'm going to pull a weed in my brain,
Exactly. No, I think that's really great because that's the other piece of what we want to talk about, are like, what are some of the things that both of us immediately started doing once we found out this was in our family history. But before we get there, I do want to just make sure to emphasize, because again, we are not doctors, we're daughters. That's become our little tagline. But the thing that is frustrating about Alzheimer's, and I think that every single one of us can kind of sit in this frustration, is that there is no way to control the outcome. You could be weeding perfectly your entire life and you could still get this disease. I think that's the thing that's scary, right? Is you can really feel like you're doing everything you can to weed your garden. You're trying to do all of the things that matter to exercise, keep your cardiovascular health up, eat really well, exercise your brain, and you potentially could still get the disease or have dementia. I mean, hopefully that would push your decline further back, right? Make it so you have a longer run rate, or if you have any decline, that it would be a much slower decline versus a really fast one. But same thing is there are probably plenty of people who have never exercised a day in their life. They don't really do anything to think about this stuff. They don't really let it occupy a ton of their mind, and then they live to be 100, right? So I think that's a really important piece just to talk about at the beginning. Is I'll just speak for myself. I've really had to think about my own mental health with this and really try to not immediately go to a place of complete panic, which would have been really easy to do, and think, oh my God, I'm definitely going to get this. I have a young child. The idea of getting this in, 20 years, 24 years, the same age my mom was diagnosed, is very terrifying. But you can't let that overcome you. And you just have to, I think for us, learn as much as we can, start to understand what are those contributing factors. And that's what we're going to share more about, the little things that we've started to do and will continue to do because you can't change it all overnight. So Amber, what are some of the things that like the changes that you've made in your life based on mom's diagnosis?
That's a good question because in all the research that we've done, we found that Alzheimer's actually starts, like the tau tangle actually starts in your 30s, which is, what both of us are in now. And so I think that's on one hand great because it means like if we start really focusing on these things now, hopefully that will lessen our chances even more. And like all of these things aren't just for brain health. They are for cardiovascular health, they're for mental health, they're for everything. So like anything we're doing is just good in general, but like now it's like another added layer. And like anytime I do any of these things, I'm doing it, I tell myself I'm doing it to try to prevent Alzheimer's, not for my cardiovascular health. And I think, everyone, has heard a lot of these things, but like for me personally, like I started going to the YMCA this past January and to specifically do weight training. Especially important for the hippocampus, the memory center that's the earliest to hit for Alzheimer's. It also helps with insulin sensitivity and blood sugar control, which we've learned is a huge factor here, reduces inflammation, hormonal effects, preserving functional independence, like it reduces fall risks and everything else like that. So that was like the number one thing that I like comes to mind, like the biggest thing I've changed, like especially in the winter, I go like 3 to 5 days a week. And then during the summer, like I just try to be really active and going on walks and tennis and just trying to stay very active there. And then I have been trying to do I'm the worst sometimes with TikTok because I'll just get on TikTok and scroll for hours like many people do. But I really try to like pull myself out of that and sometimes like open up the New York Times app and do like some of those crossword puzzles or like if I need like a 5-minute break from work, I'll pull out my word search next to me and just take like a little break and do that or something like that. Instead of just grabbing my phone and going to social media or something, and then just trying to connect those neurons and using my brain, because your brain is a muscle, and if you don't use it, you'll lose it.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
I think the last thing that comes to mind is like I really try to keep my sugar intake low. Like I'm already vegetarian and eat like a plant-based diet with like a lot of fiber and whatnot, but I really try to keep my sugar intake low because I want the inflammation in my body to stay low to help with that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for me as well. I was very worried when we got this diagnosis because they call Alzheimer's like diabetes
Type 3. Yeah.
Type 3. Yeah, exactly. And when mom was diagnosed, it was almost exactly a year to the date that I had given birth to Oliver. I had gained a tremendous amount of weight over the course of my pregnancy and then just some stress being overweight is something that has always run in our family. And so I was very worried about that myself. And so, I will say that it's one of the things that was important for me is like, it's very easy to get an idea in your head around like, I've got to start going to the gym and weight training and doing all of these things. And like, for me, that version is not accessible in my life right now, right? I've got a young toddler. I've got a really big job. Like I've got some other stuff going on, but I didn't want it to be like, oh, well, here's an excuse. I'm just not going to take care of my body or my brain, right? Obviously, there's really good reasons to make changes. So like what I did was immediately get on a low carb diet. I had to do that for myself, not necessarily only because the connection with insulin, but because I've done that in the past. It worked really well to help me lose weight. And so I just wanted to go to the quickest thing that I knew how to be able to do that would help me try to get my weight down. And that was one of the first things that I did. The next thing I did was start taking fish oils. Fish oil is a really big thing for anti-inflammatory and vascular support. And, it's definitely probably not like, a savior, right? It's like you take fish oil and you're definitely will be good, but it's definitely something that's very supportive of your body. So started doing fish oil pretty religiously. And then the other big thing is that my husband and I, we actually purchased a sauna for our house. A sauna is something that we have always enjoyed, but we didn't really understand. I started doing some research into why using a sauna was so well connected to lowering risk of Alzheimer's by over 60% in these different Finnish studies. And a lot of it has to do with cardiovascular conditioning and like the heat shock protein. And there's more, data evidence that I won't be able to kind of scientifically speak to, but the research is there. And so getting as much time in the sauna as possible each week, like at least 4 times a week, to try to really help out with that vascular health it felt like something that we could do that would be really helpful. And honestly, I've also found it very relaxing. So those are one of those things. The other thing I wanted to touch on is like hearing loss. So our mom, I feel like our mom has had hearing loss. I can't remember what age we started to really notice.
She said, because she went to all those concerts, like with no hearing protection.
Yeah, she said that, but there was an actual age, I think it was sometime in her 40s when she actually got hearing aids, like probably her late 40s. I remember there, like leading up to that, like we would tease her about we would talk to her and she would just be like, what? Like, oh my gosh. But we didn't actually, and I think we've mentioned this in past episodes, but when she started going to memory therapy, they were immediately like, you need to get your hearing aids in the second that you wake up. It's such an important thing because with hearing loss, there's cognitive load and sensory deprivation pathways, and that can lead to that cognitive decline. And so I think for me, I'm going to be extra sensitive about my hearing health and make sure to get my hearing checked early and often, just to try to kind of weed the garden, so to speak.
Yeah, that's true. Another big one that we haven't touched on is sleep apnea. That's come into a lot of studies recently that, my mom did have, and she's lost a lot of weight and she no longer has, but I think it definitely contributed to it. So the reason why it raises your Alzheimer's risk is because it's intermittent hypoxia, if I'm saying that correctly. It basically repeatedly drops your blood oxygen during sleep, and sleep is like the number one, like that is what, like your brain will clear the tau in your brain every night, and if you are not getting proper sleep, it can't do that, and so that those tau tangles build, is from my understanding. But basically, there's just a lot of internal things happening during sleep that your brain needs to get good sleep for, and sleep apnea stops that process.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, that was one piece of the puzzle, I think, for us, is to look at, contributing factors that we found out that my mom had experienced, try to get ahead of those. But there's other things too. Like, I mean, again, it's not like we have all of the time in the world to dedicate to this, right? Like, we all wish that you could just, stop life and really be able to zoom in on this. But like, again, it's over a year later and we are still figuring out this sort of stuff, like still trying to find out more information. And I will say, I just came across a study that was done, or I don't know if it was a study, but it was the 2024 Lancet Commission. And they said that 45% of dementia cases came down to 14 modifiable factors across life. And hearing loss was on there, but like things that we haven't touched on as well, like midlife hypertension. So like really controlling your blood pressure is a really important piece that I think a lot of us, like when you go to your doctor and they're like, oh, your blood pressure's a little high, they're not telling you, well, your blood pressure's a little high, and if you don't get it under control, like this could lead to an Alzheimer's diagnosis in the next 15 years. No, they're not connecting that for you. We talked about the weight that was on there. Smoking. My mom definitely was a smoker in part of her life, and that is definitely something that has shown up connected with dementia cases. Also, physical inactivity, which you talked quite a bit about, Amber, and there's a lot of information on the why there. And then the other one that I think is interesting is like social isolation.
Yeah.
And I think that this one was a little bit more kind of scrutinized, like they were kind of questioning whether that was like a true factor, the way that like inexplicitly like the hypertension, the hearing loss, the diabetes are. But I definitely think it's worth thinking about, and something that, like, again, if you can just know that like staying connected to family and friends and staying active, like those are really important ways to help prevent your own risk of Alzheimer's or dementia. Like, it's probably something that you'd want to know.
Yeah, I kind of forgot about that one, but like over the last year, I moved to Buffalo last October, and life did not work out the way I thought it was going to here, and I kind of ended up having to kind of start over here with finding new friends and a new social group. And there's lots of times, especially during the winter when it's Buffalo and you don't want to go outside and I live alone, like I'm just going to watch TV, I'm just going to do a puzzle. And I had to force myself to go to orchestra or to go to my book club or things like that, or to go to these like social events, even though I really didn't want to, because I know that that was part of it. And like, I was like, I have to go pull my weeds, so to speak. And it's great. It's been great. But sometimes you gotta, just like working out or anything else, you kind of gotta force yourself to go do something just because you know it's good for you.
Exactly. And I guess that's kind of like where we can close to this episode is like, you can't control the diagnosis, right? Like we've talked about that a lot with our mom. Like there's like, unfortunately been like a lot of self-blame that has come up in conversations with her. And like that, again, like if there's anything that we could do would be take away that self-blame from her. Like we don't want her feeling that way or thinking that she could have done things differently, because like you can't control the diagnosis. But I think for all of us who are listening that don't have a diagnosis ourselves and have thought about like, gosh, I hope I never have to get this, or like, I don't want that to happen to me. You can't control that, but you can act. And I do think that like feeling like you have a sense of control, go look at the research, pick a few things off of that and try to, do your gardening, take care of your body. And most of these things are things that are really good for us, and they make sense when you think about it from like a really bird's eye view. And so I hope like if you're out there that maybe you share with us like some of the things that you've either are going to start to do or things that make sense to you. And if there's other research out there that, that we haven't mentioned, we're still learning, right? Like we could probably do this episode again in a year from now and we'll have learned new things. So thanks for joining us on this journey to kind of figure it out. And Amber, is there anything else that you wanted to make sure we touched on today?
I'll just say, I'm also going to link in the show notes, the Alzheimer's Association released I think it was a couple months ago, like a list of the things that you can do to, prevent Alzheimer's and stuff. So I'll link that below for anyone who's interested in that as well.
Absolutely. All right, everyone. Well, thanks again for joining us today, and we will see you next time.
If this episode resonated with you, or if someone you love is navigating an Alzheimer's diagnosis, please know you don't have to fight it alone. The Alzheimer's Association is a free 24/7 resource available to anyone who needs their support. Whether you're newly diagnosed, deep in caregiving, or just trying to understand what comes next. You can reach them anytime at 1-800-272-3900. You can also reach them online at alz.org.